The Paradox Men by Charles L. Harness, published in 1949, is a science fiction novel that is introduced in this edition by Brian Aldiss, who refers to it as widescreen baroque, a term that he coined to describe these kind of science fiction novels with larger-than-life characters, fast-paced plotting, and a sense of extravagance. And I'm not sure that I can really describe this novel better than that. I mean, of course, I can't really describe and speak about science fiction in the same way that Brian Aldiss does, since he is one of the genre's all-time greats. But I'll do my best, because the book primarily centres on a man named Alar, who is a member of this elusive Society of Thieves, a sort of Robin Hood-esque organisation who steal from the rich and give to the poor, which is more of an anarchist group than anything, who are set on destabilising the upper class to stamp out corruption and greed in this society where slavery is still present. But Alar can't remember who he is or where he's from, which is kind of the central mystery in this relatively short novel. This particular edition is just about 150 pages, and a good portion of that is taken up by the intro from Brian Aldiss. And because it's so short, I'm not really going to get into the narrative too much, but clearly from the title there are some paradoxical events that revolve around space and time, relativity, and all of that good, hard, sciencey stuff that many of you will really enjoy. But I do want to touch on a few ideas in this novel, which are thrown at you kind of thick and fast, which is actually something that I think Brian Aldiss tends to do, especially when you consider novels such as Hot House. And one of the ideas in The Paradox Men is that there is this kind of disfigured man, referred to as the microfilm mind, who kind of functions a bit like a human computer, scanning all of human knowledge and providing these formulated responses to questions or coming up with solutions to problems, which is an idea that is kind of reminiscent of AI technology today, but also the way that it's described actually reminded me quite a bit of the guild navigators in Dune. And speaking of Dune, in The Paradox Men there is this armouring force field technology, which distributes the impact force of projectiles over a large surface area, effectively nullifying them. Which means that a lot of the combat in this novel takes place through the use of rapiers, these swords, or knives, which are much slower moving and can actually penetrate these force field barriers. So armed combat has kind of reverted to this more archaic form, which creates quite an interesting juxtaposition in this far future setting, which works kind of directly in combination with that Society of Thieves that I was just talking about. And that kind of shielding concept is something that is really key to Frank Herbert's Dune, with the use of the Holtzman shield. And also in Dune there is that reliance on human minds almost fulfilling the role that computers left behind, which makes it seem to me like Harness is kind of the inception point of some of these ideas, and should probably be more frequently credited for one of the more interesting aspects of potentially the most popular science fiction book of all time. But despite the influential ideas and the fast-moving plot over a relatively short page count, I can't say that I was particularly taken with this one. It kind of felt like I was walking through a sort of poorly curated museum with all of these clashing art pieces where occasionally something would catch my eye and hold my interest, but otherwise it sort of felt like a lesser version of something by Alfred Bester, an author who I think probably mastered that widescreen Baroque style more than anyone else in the genre. That being said though, a lot of people seem to really like this one. So if you're looking for some bargain bin Bester, this one might be for you. That's a bit harsh. It's a decent novel. And I think that much of what Harness threw at the wall here clearly stuck, because you can see some of those tropes reverberating throughout the genre for decades to come. The Ophiuchi Hotline by John Varley, which is apparently how that is pronounced, published in 1977, is another science fiction book with a sort of wide-angle lens, which is set in a world where Earth has been taken over by a mysterious race of alien beings, fittingly referred to as the Invaders, with humanity now residing across 8 worlds, and a large contingent is actually living on the moon in these sprawling subterranean or domed cities, because you can't really have a science fiction novel without a dome after all. And also a large population of humanity have kind of merged with these other alien life forms called symbionts, which result in these hybrid beings who are able to kind of float around in the vacuum of space. And these beings are referred to as Sims, and they are really kind of no longer quite human. They've sort of transcended humanity and become something else entirely through this symbiotic relationship with these alien beings. But then the other key plot element is that humanity have been receiving this broadcast of information, of data, from a distant constellation for hundreds of years, which is the titular Ophiuchi Hotline. And this contains instructional information on many things, but it is primarily focused on technology and methodology used for genetic engineering or manipulation, a practice which is widely utilized in this human civilization to predominantly optimize food production. But you kind of get the impression that whoever or whatever is broadcasting this information has been actively trying to support humanity's efforts to survive outside of Earth. But one day, the Ophiuchi Hotline transmits a message which is demanding payment for the transmission of this information over the last few hundred years. That's a lot of setup, a lot of world building, and I haven't really touched on the plot or the narrative too much, which I might not even do here, really, but just know that a core component of the story here revolves around cloning. And to be honest, I picked this book randomly as my next read after The Paradox Men, but I think it actually does fit quite nicely into that widescreen Baroque box that Brian Aldiss sets out, because clearly from my description of the book you can tell that there is a lot going on here. In, again, a relatively short book, this edition is less than 200 pages, which features multiple alien races, genetic engineering, cloning, faster than light travel, political maneuvering, and much more. Strangely though, with all of that going on, the novel still manages to hit a real lull in the middle, where it's kind of spinning its wheels and not much is happening, not much progress is being made, the characters are kind of stuck in one location. And on top of that frustration, Varley writes in a way that is not always very clear, and I don't think that in this case it is intentional. I don't think that the author is being purposefully difficult or obtuse. I just think that you are really feeling the fact that this is John Varley's first novel, his debut novel. So again, I didn't love it, but there were certainly a lot of ideas in here which I did end up liking. Both of these books are present on Science Fiction, the 100 Best Novels list by David Pringle, which I am reading through on the channel. I think I'm at about 60 out of 100. If you feel like joining me on this journey, then feel free to subscribe if you haven't already. But if you have, thank you very much for watching, liking and commenting. As always, let me know your thoughts on these books if you've read them. If you haven't, do they sound like they would be your cup of tea, even though they didn't really strike much of a chord with me personally? Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.